Hello and welcome to another video editing tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at nests, and no, that doesn't mean that we're going to go bird watching. If you thought that was what we were going to do today, then check the video title again. It says editing tutorials. We're going to be looking at nests that we create in Adobe Premiere Pro. They're really simple to use and often kind of underutilized. So without further ado, let's get straight into the tutorial. Okay, so as usual, we're running Adobe Premiere Pro 2019. I'm using the editing workspace here. And yeah, to create a nest, basically all you need to do is select the items within your timeline that you want to put in the nest first. So I've just got my timeline here from my previous video about writer's block. Go check that out if you care about that sort of thing. So yeah, if we just select these, I'm just going to cut here so I don't select the entire section. It will only select what is highlighted. So if I highlight these now like so, clicking and dragging with the left mouse button, we'll just right click, and then here it says nest ... So if we click that, so it comes up with this nested sequence name. I've already made some other ones in this sequence previously, so that's why it says 09. You can name it to whatever you want it to be. So let's just call this nest example 1. Say OK. Now you will see that it appears in our browser over here on the left as nest example 1. It shows up like a sequence. Just a quick note is that a sequence basically is a nest, just an open nest, shall we call it. So a closed nest, it basically looks like what you've got already in the timeline there. That is a closed nest. That is a sequence within a sequence, if you like. So if we double click on this, you can open it up. And you can see here in our sequence tabs, it opens it up as a different sequence. And here you can see we've got all of the items from our timeline that we selected and highlighted and put into the nest. So this basically is just a nice, neat, organized way to see multiple files all at once without having to go onto video track after video track. You don't want to go all the way up to like video track 10. It can start to get really hard to look at, especially when you're near the end of an edit and you just want to kind of review an overall project. It can be a nice thing sometimes to just nest things together so it's all nice and neat like so. But it's not just for organizational purposes. There are other reasons as well, obviously, that you want to use nests. One of the main things for me being if I wanted to add effects or change the positioning of certain things or add keyframes, and you want to apply those to say all of these items right here, everything you can see on screen here. So we've got the text, the image of Lessons from a Screenplay, the white background that's covering up the microphone that I have set up, and then obviously the footage here. So say I wanted to zoom in a little bit and do a little punching on my face. So there's two ways that I could do this. If we come out of the nest for a second, we'll just undo what we've done. So I could just zoom in using the normal timeline here, using the controls. If I left click, go into the effects controls, I can just scale up, let's say 120, put that in, and you can see it scales me up, but it doesn't scale everything else. And I want it to seem like we're punching in to the whole image. We're not just punching in on the video track of me, we're punching in on the video as a whole, so everything needs to punch in. So obviously what you could do is you could replicate that. You could go onto the white here and go and upscale that by 120, and that doesn't change anything. You go on here, upscale that, and then now we come into the problem where, oh look, it's 89, so it's going to upscale differently. We don't want to upscale it all the way up to 120 because it's going to be too big. It's going to do that. And then the same with the text again. We have to do this. It's going to overlap on things. It's going to go the wrong way because it's not centered correctly. The anchor point for the text is different to the anchor point of my other files here. So it just looks like a mess and it would take ages to organize. So basically, the nice quick way of doing this, as I say, is to go and do your nest. So we need to name it again now, nest example 1. Make it into the nest, and now if we just scale up to 120, you can see it scales everything that is within the nest, all by the same values. And then you can start tweaking it around. You can move the positioning. It moves everything all together. Obviously, it's all only within the dimensions that you have for your sequence, but it's useful for moving multiple files around at once and scaling them up, scaling them down, making sure that they're all being treated equally rather than having to go in and individually tweak the values of each individual item that you're editing. Another thing it's good for, similarly, is using keyframes. So again, by the same token, if we went back, go back to here before we created the nest. So say I wanted to do a little zoom in on me instead of just a punch in. So say, again, go into effects controls, we use the toggle animation on both of these, we skip ahead to about here, and then we go 120, and I don't know, just put myself in the frame like so. So now when we play it through, you can see it zooms in on me, but again, not zooming in on everyone else. So the same thing applies basically. We would just go back and we would put all of these within a nest example 1, and then just use the toggle animation on the effects controls for the nest itself. So then it will do a nice little zoom for everything together, just onto my face wherever I want to position it, and all this other stuff will move to this side, all animated exactly the same. It's nice and neat, and a lot faster as well. So that's one of the reasons you might want to use nests. Another one is to add effects to an entire section. So say you wanted to, I don't know, add a filter over the lens. Let's say we wanted to make everything look really contrasty for some reason. If we go into our contrast settings over here, bring that in to the effects controls, you can just drag it onto the nest as I did then, like you would with any other clip, and you can start editing the values, and you can see that it's editing the values of everything within the nest, rather than me having to go into the nest and put these on individually. Obviously you can do this if you just want to up the contrast of, say, the footage of me. You would literally just put it on as you would normally, go down, find the effect that you're adding, and use the brightness and contrast there, and then it will only affect me, and that will obviously affect this live in the timeline here. So anything you do within the nest, any changes you make here, so say if we move the channel text here across to the right for whatever reason, that will update in the main timeline that we have here within the nest. It's all live updates. The nest is not a photograph of the file structure that you made when you created the nest. It will update live with whatever is in the nest, whatever you do within the nest itself, which is useful to know. So yeah, if I wanted to up the contrast to all of this, or if I wanted to put another effect on, something maybe a little bit nicer, like maybe a vignette, but I wanted everything in the image to be vignetted rather than just individual items. Obviously, if I was to add a vignette to this, the vignette would only apply to the edges of this image. It wouldn't apply to everything. Whereas if I put it on just the video, it wouldn't apply to the white underneath. It might get cropped out there because obviously there's a mask there that you can't see. It's much easier just to apply the effects on top of everything overall, so that then everything is treated equally and nothing looks janky. So now I've just opened up the edit for a short film that I worked on. It's on the channel now, actually, if you want to go and watch it if you're interested. But here you can see I've done a master sequence where I've basically got all the individual scenes that I've put together and just put them into their own nests, and then put them all together in one big master timeline so I can see it all together, nice and simple. I put the title sequence there in between where the text for Honor comes up, and we put the music underneath as well, which is a nice way to kind of make sure that the music passes nicely through each individual scene. And you can also do things like, say there's a section of a scene that I want to cut out, say, I don't know, we're just going to randomly go, right, I don't want this part of this scene here. I've just opened that nest up now, so we're in scene 4. I don't need here to, let's say, over here somewhere. So if I go out, rather than deleting this and then closing the gap and going back and having to edit in here, I can just cut the nest in half, close the gap. The music's still in place. I haven't affected the music track there. None of the soundtrack has been cut out or sound inconsistent. I can just tweak that myself later. And I've also not deleted anything within scene 4. That's all still here in sequence. I've just cut it out of the nest itself. So even though when we go into the nest, the part that I wanted to remove from the master timeline is still here, it's not appearing in the master timeline because I've just cut that section of the nest out of this timeline. It doesn't actually delete it out of the nest. Okay, so back into the first project I was working on. If we just take this nest here, let's just throw it at the end of the timeline so we can work on it separately. So we just grab it there in the bins if we want to and drag it across. So here you can see also we can actually edit the volume of the nest. Sometimes that helps if you just have a lot of sound effects all together. So it would work in the same way if we had loads of different audio files under here in various audio tracks. They would all be stored within the nest, and then we could just boost the master volume of all of those audio files together here if we wanted to, like so, or by right clicking, going to the audio gain, etc. So it's a nice way to raise the overall volume of a scene, if you like, rather than having to go into the nest and individually tweak the volume for each individual audio file. Again, there are various ways to do it, but that's one way that you can quickly do something like that. I also want to explain that you can't make the nest longer. You can see that I'm trying to drag it to the right. You can't make it longer than whatever is the longest file within the nest. So here now, it's about 5 seconds long. I can't make this nest drag out longer than 5 seconds. You can do things like the speed and duration. You can still edit the nest like that. That won't affect anything inside the nest. It will just be how it plays what's in the nest on your timeline here. So I could slow it down if I wanted to extend it out. But basically, if you wanted to drag it out further, you'd have to extend whatever was in the nest. So say we just drag out this clip here. You'll go back into the main timeline. You'll now see that I can drag it out to the end point of this file here. Something to be aware of though is if I now drag this back and go back into the main sequence, you'll see the nest itself hasn't changed its size. This is all just blank basically, but it's told you that this is blank by putting these kind of striped lines here, basically saying this is dead space. You don't want this. It's not necessary to be in your timeline, so you just need to cut this out. So you need to find the point where it goes to black and just remove it. So just be aware of that if you're tweaking anything within inside your nests. If you're changing the length of it, if you're adding time or removing time, you then need to tweak it accordingly within your main timeline where you've put the nest. If you deleted it out like so and then extended it and then wanted to bring it back into your sequence like so, it will adjust the length accordingly to match what you have in the nest now. But just be aware that if you're tweaking it and you have it already in an existing timeline, you will need to alter the duration of it in that timeline. So just watch for that. There's not really too much else to say about Nest. We kind of have covered all the basics here. Just to say, one thing to note, if we were to duplicate the sequence here, let's just call it sequence 2. If I was to then drag that sequence into this sequence 1 here, you'll see it appears as a nest. So basically, that's all of this here that I've just put into a sequence. Obviously, I just duplicated sequence 1. That then all appears within its own nest if you drag that sequence into another timeline. Obviously, we can open that sequence as its own thing. It's all here. Obviously, it's identical to this one here. But we can also use it as a nest, like I did with the On the short film. That was what all those scenes were. They were all their own long sequences, and then I just dragged those sequences into a master sequence as such. The other thing to quickly mention is that multi-camera sequences are basically fancy nests. They have a bit more functionality than the bog standard ones that we're creating here today, but I have a video tutorial on creating and editing multi-camera sequences if you want to go and check that out as well. But lastly, I just wanted to mention that sometimes creating nests has helped me around little glitches here and there. For example, I've had it sometimes where legacy title text like this, I can't keyframe the scale or the position for whatever reason. I've encountered glitches regarding trying to mask things like that. And I found that 9 times out of 10, if it's giving me trouble for whatever reason, you can literally just nest that one item. So say this wasn't allowing me to use keyframes to change the scale from 100 to 120. It wasn't scaling it up. It was just doing nothing. I could just right click, nest it into its own little sequence. So we'll just call it nest example 2. And then that little nest file here is literally just that little bit of text that we had. Obviously you can't see it because it's black on black. But then here I would be able to go in and I'd be able to keyframe it however I want, like we did before. And 9 times out of 10 it won't give you any trouble when you're doing it via a nest if the text or whatever the file is itself isn't allowing you to do it. Just remember that the nest will assume the dimensions of the sequence that you've created in. It won't assume the dimensions of the files that you've nested. So you can see here that the overall size of this nest is 1920 by 1080. It's not just the text box. The reason I'm mentioning that is because if I go into the nest now, I can't see this, so I'm just going to quickly add a bit of white. So I've added a bit of white now just so we can see what's going on here. Obviously that will affect how it looks in our sequence here. But you can see if I move the text around like this within the nest, obviously you can move it in and out of the screen and it retains all of the text there. You can move the text out so that only part of it's shown, and then you can bring it in to reveal the text. Let's say we left it out like this and we wanted to bring in and reveal the text using the nest. That's not going to work here. Basically, you're going to see this. It's going to cut it off. It's only going to show you what you can see in the nest at this moment in time. If you wanted the text to slide in from the right like that, you would basically probably need to do it within the nest itself. You need to keyframe in the nest. You wouldn't be able to keyframe out of the nest because the nest can only see what you have at that moment in time within the nest, if that makes sense. So I think that's pretty much everything covered that I wanted to talk about regarding the nests. As I say, they're very useful little tools. Just got to basically see them as a sequence within a sequence, and an easy way to apply certain effects and keyframes to a collection of files rather than trying to do it on each individual file at once. and potentially making a mess of things. It's good for organization. It makes for a nice clean timeline. So utilize it in moderation, and yeah, hopefully it will help you to improve your edits in the future. So there you have it. Now you should know how to use nests effectively within your editing timelines. If you want to leave any suggestions for any future editing tutorials in the comments below, please go ahead and do that. Hopefully this tutorial was useful. If it was, leave a like. If it wasn't, don't. And yeah, we'll see you again for the next one. Thanks for watching. Doesn't mean we're looking at bird nests. We're looking at the nests that you create in Adobe Premiere Pro, you idiot. Why are you even here if you're looking at bird nests? This is the wrong channel for that. Go watch Birdwatch or something.